Well, it's the second week of March 2024. I'm going to spend some time studying a fairly unique area for geology today. And we're going to be looking at some bedrock geology and some glacial geology of the Barndoor Hills. This is in north central Connecticut. If anybody watched my hike in November of 2023 up Toccoa Mountain, Toccoa Mountain is about 15 miles north of here in Massachusetts. I'm zooming in on it right now. Right in the center of your screen. From that mountain we could clearly see some knobs to our south. And those are the Barndoor Hills. There's 7 or 8 of these knobs that stick up a few hundred feet above the surrounding plains of sand. And yes, there's extensive sand plains in this area. And let's get a better look on this side of the mountain. You can really see the evidence of that. So this is, well, I'm standing on West Barndoor Hill right now. This is owned by the Granby Land Trust. Just to the east of me here is the East Barndoor Hill, which is part of the McLean Game Refuge. We'll be spending some time exploring the trails of that game refuge in the next few hours here. But if you look at this East Barndoor Hill, it appears to be a lot of deciduous trees that haven't got their leaves yet, and a mixture of conifers. As you pan to the southeast of that hill, it's almost exclusively conifers and almost exclusively white pine. You can see that right there. So there are extensive sand plains in the lowlands between these Barndoor Hills. And we're going to be exploring those sand plains and looking for some kettle holes that are described in the literature of this area, the geological history of this area, and be looking for some unique plants that grow in those kettle holes. Supposed to be some black spruce in one of those kettle holes, so we'll see if we can get close enough to them to see them as we walk the trails of the West Barndoor Hill Nature Preserve and the McLean Game Refuge this afternoon. And while we're at this lookout, we are looking north toward Toccoa Mountain. Some overcast skies today, some snow flurries to our west. One thing that makes the Pioneer Valley and the Connecticut Valley such good farmland is it's much warmer here than the surrounding hills to our west, and you can see that clearly today just by the clouds. That overcast cloud bank is there to stay over the Berkshire Hills, but as the air comes down about 1,500 feet in elevation, it dries out and clears out, and it's often much warmer in the Hartford-Springfield area than in the Berkshire Hills. Warm enough they can actually grow tobacco around here, and they still do, but not as much as in past years. Looking north, right in the center of the screen is Mount Tom, which is made of ancient lava flows. And just in the center of your screen right there is one of the Barndoor Hills geologically. That's Manitouk Mountain in West Suffield, Connecticut, and East Granby, Connecticut. It's also called Quarry Mountain. And then to the center of your screen there is West Suffield Mountain, which is also an ancient lava flow. And then directly in front of us, in the shade of a cloud right now, is that East Barndoor Hill. And then way to our east, over towards Somers and Stafford Springs, Connecticut, is Soapstone Mountain, right in the center of your screen right there. Almost 1,100 feet in elevation. And then to the north of that is Bald Mountain, which is over 1,100 feet in elevation. And I'm just trying to get out of the wind to do a little bit more explaining of the geology of these Barndoor Hills. Before we do that though, there's a pretty gnarled looking red cedar up here. And this thing is 1 foot in diameter at the bottom, and it's growing every which way but up. And I'm not going to try to core it. I don't have coring tools with me today, but I would expect it to be quite old, living on this hillside here, hundreds of years. And I did a hike just south of here in Simsbury, Connecticut last spring. The West Mountain Trails, it was called, and found similar size red cedars, gnarled and twisted, on those ancient lava flows there as well. And that's what we're looking at here. There's two types of ancient lava flows in this area, and I'm going to explain a little bit why there are lava flows in this area. These blocks of wood here represent the Earth's crust. And the Earth's crust moves, and sometimes the Earth's crust, blocks of the Earth's crust, move towards each other, and the land rises upwards. Those are called folded mountains, or sometimes they can also be called overthrust mountains, where the mountains are thrust over top of each other. And those are not always the places where we find ancient lava flows, although if there's enough heat being generated by that overthrust or folding, you can get magma rising to the surface. Often, if the land is being pulled apart in what's called a rift valley, the Earth's crust sinks down as these two blocks are pulled apart by internal forces in the Earth's crust. These rift valleys are what often start oceans. The Red Sea is one of those. Parts of East Africa have lakes that are occupied, or that occupy rift valleys. And the Connecticut River Valley, actually the central valley of Connecticut from New Haven to Hartford up to Springfield, Massachusetts and beyond, is a rift valley. The Connecticut River occupies part of that valley. Is where the Earth's crust was separating, pulling apart, and the valley lowered in elevation as that was happening, and it filled up with sand and gravel. Not the sand and gravel we're going to look at today, but sand and gravel that has since become bedrock of sandstone and shale and conglomerate. So these cracks that form as this ocean block, or excuse me, as these blocks are separating, are the places where the magma can come up and cover that sand and gravel. And this map shows the area where those rift valleys have occurred, from Nova Scotia down through the Connecticut Valley, through New Jersey and northern Virginia, all the way down to the Carolinas. I haven't explored too many of those areas south of the Mason-Dixon line, but I have explored the area around New Jersey and south central New York. I did a hike up Hook Mountain, New York last year that is an ancient lava flow. That's still on this channel. This shows in detail here on the right, this little inset, that lava flows around Springfield, Massachusetts, down to Hartford, Connecticut. There's one lava flow we're standing on right now that did not make it to the surface. If you look at this snack cake here, that white cream would represent lava that came up during the rifting process but never made it to the surface. That's called a sill, like a windowsill. And it still hardens and still becomes bedrock. And it solidifies between the layers of sandstone while still underground. The crystals in this type of ancient lava flow are much larger because it had a chance to cool slower than the crystals in some of the other lava flows around here, including Mount Tom and West Suffield Mountain. So there's what the lava flow would look like after Mother Nature eroded the top off of it. So this sill that we're standing on today was injected between layers of sandstone, and then Mother Nature washed away over millions of years the bedrock on top of it and left this layer of white cream frosting as our ancient lava flow exposed. But it was between layers of sandstone when it first formed and hardened many millions of years ago. In the mountain ridge just to our east, the Barndoor Hills are lava flows that didn't make it to the surface. Just to our east is West Suffield Mountain and Talcott Mountain in the area around Mount Tom. On the map here, that is shown basically as this line from Northampton, Massachusetts, right down to Meriden, Connecticut. I did a hike in that area around Meriden last fall as well. That was exploring the New England Trail. That lava flow made it to the surface and then cooled. And eventually sandstone or sand deposits were put on top of that as well by more erosion and more down dropping of the Earth's crust. So get back to these blocks here. As that center block there continued to slide down, the lava flow was deposited on top of the sand and then covered again with more sand. So this took millions of years. This is back during the Triassic and Jurassic time periods. Let's go forward in geological time. During the Triassic and Jurassic, that center block of the Earth's crust was being lowered and filled with sand and gravel and lava flows. Everything became bedrock, and eventually the geological activity ceased and everything started eroding away. It wasn't until about 100,000 years ago that ice sheets started descending southward from Canada. The evidence of the first few ice flows is not found in New England because the most recent one, the Wisconsin, basically bulldozed all those away and made them hard to define. But the Kansas, Nebraska, and Illinois ice flows came before the Wisconsin, which is the one that left the sand deposits here in the last 10,000 years. So as that ice sheet was melting, huge torrents of meltwater and all the dirt and debris that got caught up in those glaciers started to fill the lower areas between these Barndoor hills. There's East Barndoor Hill right there. So this lowland became filled with extensive sand and gravel deposits. I've got a map that shows that. Basically everything in pink and purple on this map is sand and gravel deposits. And everything that's a darker green or a medium green is deposits that were left by the glaciers that weren't left by meltwater, but just by the bulldozing action of the ice sheets themselves. That's called glacial till. We are standing right here on West Barndoor Hill, and the green around that is glacial till, which is basically a lot of boulders with a little bit of dirt in between them. But as we come down in elevation, we'll get into an area that's mostly gravel and sand. And that's where we can find these kettle hole ponds that I've got circled right there. One right there, and one or two of them right here. And they're all pretty close to where I'm standing right now, within an hour's walk. So as we go along, we might make note of some other interesting features, but we'll be looking for those kettle hole ponds this afternoon and seeing if we can find some of the trees that normally don't grow in this area living in those depressions. Well, as we descend off this West Barndoor Hill, if we had that geology map out that showed the glacial till and the sand deposits, we'd still be in the green part of that map, which is the glacial till. And basically the glaciers just smooth over the bedrock, pick up pieces of it, move it, grind it up a little bit. Sometimes they can be moved very long distances, but often they aren't. And this is all the bedrock that this Barndoor Hill is made out of, and somebody built a wall out of it. Try to keep their livestock from roaming too far. And you can kind of feel that coarse grain texture there of this basalt. The glacial till soil, at least when it's made from this type of bedrock, is pretty full of sticky materials. It sticks together when moist. So lots of silt and a little bit of clay in the mixture there. You take away the rocks from this soil here, it probably should be pretty fertile. But with all the rocks, it probably wouldn't be very easy to grow anything on this mountainside. We'll look at the soil down below when we get into that pink and purple shaded area on the map and see how that compares. Well, from the top of the Barndoor Hills, you can see a vast plain of mostly evergreen trees, a lot of white pine and some hemlock. And underneath those is a extensive deposit of sand. And depressions in that sand create a really unique habitat we're going to go explore soon, and that's a kettle hole. Some of them are supposed to have some northern trees that don't grow anywhere else in this area. I'm along the banks of Bissell Brook here, just a few hundred yards from the Barndoor Hills here. And this sand along the stream here would represent the vast quantities of sand left behind by the glaciers. And as the glaciers are melting, chunks of ice melt slower than other chunks of ice. Meanwhile, the sand is being deposited all around those chunks of ice. So I've got some here to represent that. That is a real chunk of ice. It's going to melt slowly today. We'll come check on it in a few hours here and see what's left over. Meanwhile, the sand would be working its way around that chunk of ice from flowing water like we see right here. So this represents what did happen here thousands of years ago. Here's another chunk right here. So we'll let these melt slowly today. We'll come check them out in a few hours. The old March winds are blowing strong, but underneath these tall pine trees, we can hear the wind, but we don't feel too much of it. A little bit more sun than an hour ago. We've come about a mile from the top of West Barndoor Hill. We're in the area that was shown in the map in purple and pink. And instead of seeing all those angular boulders and real rocky ground, we're into sand plain. And most of this sand was brought here by meltwater streams from the glaciers. So the glaciers move the rocks and sometimes grind them up. And then as they melt, it all gets separated out into sand and gravel, depending on how fast the water's moving. Any rocks we do find in this area probably are going to be rounded. And because the sand and gravel does not hold water very long, the trees that grow in these sand and gravel deposits are ones that can withstand dry soil during the growing season especially. So we're getting a lot of white pine. There's even some pitch pine in here. But the pitch pine is on its way out. There's one right here. But it will not continue without full sun for the seeds to germinate. Unlike the white pine, which you can see by the thousands here, growing in the understory of this forest. So the pitch pine needs open sun to perpetuate its species, and the white pine can grow in the shade of other trees, including itself. So this is mostly white pine in here. And any boulders we see around here are going to be more rounded from the actions of that meltwater stream. This one here is still a little bit angular, but they tend to be more rounded. So we're into sand and gravel deposit. The first of the 3 kettle holes I'm going to look for today is just around the corner here. And the trail map of the clean grain refuge. There's lots and lots of trails. Kettle Pond is actually shown on the map right next to the trail we're on right now. So we're kind of on a level sand plain here. Then all of a sudden, off to my left here, there's a loss in elevation of 40 or 50 feet. Shows up on the topographic maps as a depression contour. In other words, this pond has no outlet and the land rises up on all 4 sides. And yes, there's been a lot of rain this winter. And this pond is full. Probably up several feet higher than it normally would be, because I see trees growing out of the water instead of next to the water. So I'm assuming this doesn't have an outlet, but if it got full enough, it probably would. Normally kettle holes, the water drains out the bottom, and some of them are well drained enough that there is no pond, but just usually sometimes a wetland, sometimes nothing at all except more forest. But yeah, here's more of those rounded boulders. We saw that stone wall up on West Barndoor Hill with all those angular rocks, and the sand and gravel and boulders in this glacial outwash deposit. That's what we call these sand plains, the outwash, the material that washed out of the glacier as it melted, is all rounded or mostly rounded. can see that in this old stone wall. It goes into the pond, but I don't know how far. But again, this pond is up several feet, I'm sure. And looks like some cottonwood's growing along the edge of it. That's a good place for a cottonwood. Right along the edge of a wetland or a river. A little bit of red maple here as well. So this is a kettle pond. I'm guessing right now it's probably at least 2 acres in size because it's pretty full. It could be a little smaller during the drier months. And as far as I can tell, there's no outlet. The only way the water would go out would be to drain out the bottom or to evaporate. And this time of year, with excess rain, it is very, very full. So this is the first of 3 kettle ponds we're going to explore today, and these would be what's left behind after those blocks of ice melt that I showed in the previous section of this video. And as we walk towards the second and third kettle, pretty level, this sand plain here, as expected. Level enough, they did farm it. It's in the natural history of this area. It was a report done back in the 1960s that I read about the natural history of this park. It's been here much longer than that. McLean Game Refuge has been here for over 100 years. But sand is infertile. And many farmers had livestock. And yes, I believe this is an old manure spreader. And the new ones don't look much different. These little tines that stick up to fling the manure in all directions. And was left here. So I don't know if this was, it's got the chain on it and everything to run the conveyor to get the manure to go back to the thing that flings it up in the air. But I don't know how old this actually is. I'm guessing it was from before this became a park. So whether it was drawn by a tractor or drawn by a horse or an oxen, I don't know. But this infertile soil here leads to certain trees that can prosper, other ones that just barely survive in infertile soil. You probably won't find a sugar maple or a basswood growing on this sand plain, but plenty of black oak, a little bit of scarlet oak, and some white oak as well as the white pine and pitch pine. So these glacial deposits, you know, what the glacier is moving determines what the soil is like, but also how the glacier melts and where the soil gets sent by the glacial meltwater. Just east of here, there's a glacial lake near the Connecticut River itself that actually, instead of being sand deposits, is actually silt and clay that settled out into that lake, and that's much better soil and would yield to a whole different forest. And that's just like over east of here in the Suffield and Enfield areas. And as these ice blocks melt and leave depressions in the sand, sometimes the sides of these kettles are quite steep, 30, 40 degrees. Sand will only get so steep, a sand dune or a sand bank will only get so steep, and then the sand starts falling down upon itself. So that's how steep some of these banks are, and they're covered in trees. It's mostly hemlock on this kettle here. There's kettle 2 and kettle 3 that I'm going to explore today. Are right next to each other. This is the second kettle, and it does have water in it, but not always. In this case, it's got some water around the edges, and then I'm not sure if this is a floating bog mat or just sphagnum moss that's growing on the remains of leaves and trees that filled this kettle over the years. But this sphagnum moss creates a very highly acid environment. There it is right there, growing up like little trees almost. An acid environment where things don't decay very well or very quickly. It's not uncommon to find plant fossils in these bogs that are thousands of years old. And because it's a very harsh environment, only certain plants can grow out there. There's quite a few red maples and white pines growing in this particular kettle. And if I hadn't read that there was a few black spruce in this kettle back in the 1960s when they did the study of this area. I probably wouldn't have noticed it, but there are some in the background there that are hard to see. The kettle next to this is supposed to have more black spruce. I could kind of see it as I walked by it. We'll hop on over to that and take a better look, but black spruce normally doesn't grow at this latitude except in bogs, and it only grows in places where the seeds can get full sun and germinate. And if other trees overtop the black spruce, then it goes away. It needs full sun. So because this is such a harsh environment, trees don't grow very tall, they don't grow very fast, and the black spruce can hang around for thousands of years when the surrounding land, which could have had black spruce right after the glaciers left, has since gone through succession into a more temperate forest. Alrighty, and just a few hundred feet to the east of that second kettle hole, we've got the third one we're going to explore today. And this one I read had more black spruce. It was 50% black spruce, I think is what it said in the study that was done 60 years ago. So the fact that it's still here doesn't surprise me, because again, nothing else really wants to grow out here that hasn't already come along. So there's a ring of water around these bogs, and then you get to a sphagnum layer. There's also a lot of shrubs in this bog too, but you can clearly see those evergreen silhouettes here. If this were a colder winter, I could have walked out there, but we never really had enough cold weather to try to do that safely, because these bog mats, sometimes they're solid underneath, sometimes they're floating, but either way you can't trust them. You got to be careful, put it that way. People go out on them to do studies, but you got to be careful. So here's some black spruce. None of them are very tall. And they're kind of in the shade there, but that's black spruce growing at an elevation in an area where it would not normally be found, because the sphagnum moss that fills this kettle hole provides an environment where nothing else really wants to grow and nothing else really can grow to outcompete it. And behind it, on the hillside to our east, is some tall white pines and hemlocks. So this black spruce is here because it's been here since the last ice age and hasn't been displaced. Black spruce, you can't really see it from here, but it keeps its cones. They don't fall off. And the needles tend to be a little more bluish green than the red spruce, which has more of a bright green needle. I've done studies on those on my other channel. That channel is called Barking Up the Right Tree. I did a study in 2021 on red and black spruce where we could compare them both side by side. But I came here today to basically look at these kettle holes and also look at those the Barndoor hills, and I've done both in the last 3 or 4 hours. I might do a few more little clips along the way. There's lots of trails here. There's a lot to look at these nature preserves in this area, including this McLean Game Refuge. So we might add a few more short clips or even stitch some photos onto this video set. But I found what I came to look for today, and these are fascinating places. I've had several requests over the years to explore areas with bogs and to do more about geology. So I'm partially honoring those requests today and partially just satisfying my own curiosity. Well, it's been about 5 hours since I put these ice blocks in the sand along the brook here. The air temperature was supposed to get in the mid-40s today, but in the shade, I don't know if it ever got that warm. So there was some melting here, enough to get the idea of this demonstration across, but they haven't melted completely. But you can see where that block of ice has started to melt. And a pretty steep edge of the sand there, where the block used to be. Of course, as that sand dries out, that would kind of fall in on itself and create a steep but not vertical slope on this kettle hole. So that's the idea I'm trying to get across, but the ice isn't going to melt in the time allowed today. It just isn't that warm. But there's this one here as well. So imagine that over a vast sand plain. And there's many, many kettle holes in New England, and many in this area, and many in the upper Midwest in Minnesota and Wisconsin and upper Michigan. Even parts of Indiana have them. So they're pretty common geological phenomenon. And in this case, in this park, they created a unique habitat for black spruce. And we'll take one last viewpoint here, put the wraps on this adventure. We're looking west towards the hill where we started today. I'm on the East Barndoor Hill. The trails on the McLean Game Refuge lead up this hill. And directly to our west is West Barndoor Hill, which has its own trail system operated by the Granby Land Trust. Well, the sky's really cleared out and the wind has not ceased, but it made for really clear skies here. And this East Barndoor Hill has similar vegetation, lots of cedar trees up here, some hickory as well. And a view looking the other way, looking to our southwest. So we can see down the valley of the Farmington River towards Simsbury and Avon and Canton. I believe, it's hard to tell because it's backlit, but right in the center of the screen there is the West Mountain Trails that I explored last May. I'll be looking for more places like that in the spring. Good wildflower areas in New England, and with any luck I'll have the time to go check some out in April and May. Keep exploring these lesser known preserves, and I'm always happy to honor requests on geology, plants, and anything else I'm qualified to comment on or go looking for.